Okay, so we're going on to our third talk on epistemology and specifically the philosophy of perception. And today we're going to be looking at indirect realism a little bit more. This time we're going to actually look at how direct realists can respond to indirect realism. I mean, direct realists aren't just going to give up that easily and accept the existence of sense data and that we don't see things as they are. So there are some responses they can make, and they can be quite persuasive. A lot is left hanging in the balance about whether you find their responses good or not. We'll look at them now. So the problems with direct realism, we said, were perceptual variation, illusion, and hallucination, and the time lag argument. And effectively, seeing all of these, we thought that it made sense to think that there was something in the mind, sense data, which somehow corresponds with things out in the world. Things out in the world cause these sense data, and we have access to these sense data immediately, and we have privileged access to them, and I have access to my sense data that I don't have to yours. And indirect realists thought this was the best way to make sense of these problems that, naive realism or direct realism, as we call it, has. What can the direct realists say in response to some of this stuff? Well, direct realists respond in different ways. So, from the argument of perceptual variation, they say in perception we see both intrinsic properties and their relational properties. Intrinsic properties are, for example, that a table takes up space, it has volume. Relational properties are how the table is related to other things, including us. So it's important to understand the difference philosophers have between these two ideas, right? So let's look at intrinsic and relational properties in a bit more detail. So imagine you're in a field, or a person's in a field with somebody else. And the intrinsic properties of people belongs to what it is to be a person, for example, or any object really, is that it takes up space, right? It takes up three-dimensional space. So the property of having volume, let's say, that would be intrinsic to an object, to a person, for example. Perhaps the fact that that one's identical with oneself, that there's only one of you, would be something that's intrinsic to you. But relational properties are not about you yourself or the thing itself, they're about how something's related to something else. So in this instance, for example, we see that one person is further away from the other in the field. And that relationship between those two objects is a relational property. It belongs to them insofar as they're related to each other in different ways. So Edinburgh is north of London, or Bristol is west of London. Those are relational properties. They don't belong in an intrinsic way to those objects. In theory, those could swap. Certainly the people in the field could swap, being north or south of each other. So they're not intrinsic, they are relational. Okay, and the key claim that the direct realists make is that you can see relational properties, right? So an object can be one thing and appear to be another, they say, because although both of these people are 6 foot tall, one looks larger and one looks smaller because we can actually see that one is closer to us and the other's further away. In other words, we can see relational properties. Relational properties aren't just there in the ether, they affect our experiences. So if I see someone and they look small even though they're 6 foot, that's because they're far away and I can see them being far away. I can see the relational property. That again works here with the idea of refraction. Okay, so the pencil is there. When we perceive an illusion, we see the object and its relational property, in this case being in water. The relational property seen directly causes the thing to appear different. So the direct realist wants to say that what I'm seeing is a pencil, and I'm seeing the pencil in water, it's related to water, and the water and the pencil are related to my mind, and that means that it affects the look of the pencil. Does this argument succeed? Well, I suppose the indirect realist can say that either way I do not see the object as it is. So either I'm seeing something other than the object, sense data, or the object appears as it's not. And so we're at the same impasse. There seems to be an appearance and a reality. So if there's an appearance and then there's the reality, they can't be the same things. So it's a difficult one. I think that it's tempting to think that in some sense the pencil is presenting itself as it isn't, rather than us not seeing it. Although it becomes problematic here, and I think it's not clear where we should go with this. One thing that is clear is that there's a difference between appearance and reality, and that needs explaining. The response to the argument from hallucination is more problematic, but they do try, the direct realists. A normal mental state and a hallucination are totally different, they say. In normal mental states, I'm connected to the external world, but in a hallucination, my mind is not connected to the world. Both of these are possible mental states, say the direct realists. So effectively, to make this very clear to you, the direct realists are saying that there's two different mental states. There's normal mental states, when we haven't taken a drug or we're not sick, and when we see things as they are. But if we've ingested some kind of toxin, or if we're sick, our mental state is different, and it's totally different, and therefore it allows for the mind to produce images. So this is sometimes known as the disjunctive theory of mental states, and the direct realist effectively wants to say that hallucination is not a normal mental state, it's an unusual mental state, and that's why we are perceiving something that isn't there. The response to this, I think, from the indirect realist is going to be, well, you're complicating the mind a little bit too much here. It's much more reasonable to suppose that all of our experiences are effectively products of the mind, granted that a hallucination is a more severe product. It's an overplay of the mind, if you like, but I think it makes more sense to think that there's just one state, so to speak. Now, the time lag argument, again, can be answered by the direct realist. What they effectively say is what we said earlier, which is we see the light directly. Right? We see the light directly, and we see the object of the light indirectly, and therefore they kind of make the reasonable claim that philosophically speaking, the time lag argument isn't a problem. What we see directly is the light. Right? We see the light directly from the sun. We do not need sense data to see the sun. What we need is the light rays to go into our mind and to see those light rays directly. I think the indirect realist can say, well, perhaps that's the case, and so in some sense sense data might not exist, but then we have this other issue of this problem of time, right? This problem with whether we're seeing things directly in time or not, which seems still not to be the case given what we know from physics. So key terms that you want you to remember here are intrinsic property. An intrinsic property is something that belongs to an object itself, right? So we think that objects usually have things that they must have to be objects. They must take up space. They probably weigh something, for example. They'll have a mass. Objects in the outside world usually have some kind of chemical or physical structure. That's part of being an object. Relational properties are properties that the object doesn't have because of what it is, but has because of how it's related to something else, and they're important. They claim the direct realists can be seen. Indirect realists think that doesn't make sense, and they're kind of overcomplicating things there. They're not denying that there's relational properties, they just think that to claim that they affect experience kind of begs the question effectively. Okay, hope that's been helpful.